Hi everyone! So I recently broke a powdered compact of a product that I was going to review and I was pretty upset. However, never throw these things out because you can absolutely repair them. I have done this in the past with eyeshadows that I've pressed, either from a pigment or because I've accidentally broken it, and I've also done it with blushes and highlighters. So I wanted to show you how this is done so that you can save one of your own products should you happen to smash it. For this, you're going to need some paper towel or a cloth to protect your work surface. You will also need some rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. Some people have said that you need 99% proof, which is what this bottle is. However, I have used 70 without any issue before. You're also going to need some kind of tea towel. Whatever the pattern is for the threading on here, that is going to be the imprint that is left on your product, so keep that in mind. You will also need some kind of implement to break up your product, and for this I'm just using one of these metal spatulas, but I have used a Q-tip in the past without any issue. You also need something that is roughly the same size as your pan in order to press it down. I just chose this Burt's Bees cuticle butter because it's roughly the same size as my compact. You will also need something heavy in order to weight the product down, so I've got a dictionary here and that's going to be plenty heavy enough. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing here, let me show you what I've pressed in the past. So these three eyeshadows down here are Makeup Geek pigments that I put into pans and then pressed it down, and now the shadows are perfectly usable, just in an easier to use format. You don't have to be worried about all of that powder flying everywhere. You've got a pressed shadow. I've also done this with some MAC products before. I have a pressed pigment here and one here as well. Sadly, I've also broken two highlighters in this palette, but I have repressed them, and they are Champagne Pop and Prosecco Pop. And you get a little bit of an idea of how they look after they've been pressed. The blushes are fine, but the highlighters down here were the ones that were repressed. So what we're going to be fixing today is this sad Becca highlighter. So this is one of their light chasers, and I sadly dropped it, and because it's so fragile, it broke. So I want to repress this so I can use it because it's a beautiful shade. You can leave it as is in the compact, but you're going to have to break it up a little bit. So I'm going to take the metal spatula and just kind of break it apart until it's a little bit more loose powdered. I don't really need those chunks in there, so I just want to break them up a little bit. Alright, so at this point I have broken it up a little bit more. There are some chunks that are left in here, but it's mostly quite a lot of powder. I'm going to be using the rubbing alcohol to turn this into a paste though, so I'm not that worried about having too many chunks in here because the rubbing alcohol will end up smoothing this out. So I take a little bit of the rubbing alcohol and I pour it into the cap. You can use a syringe for this, but honestly I've done it so many times that I just kind of eyeball it. There is no exact measure on how much rubbing alcohol you want to be putting in this product. Just keep in mind that you're turning this into a soft paste that is almost liquidy. You don't want it too firm because then you can't repress it properly, but you also don't want it sopping wet because you're not turning this into a drink. So I apply a little bit on top, and then I take my utensil and just kind of mush it together. And this is where it goes into that kind of like gloopy consistency. That's not runny enough, but I'm going to keep mixing it together until I can't disperse the liquid anymore. And then I'll just keep adding a little bit more alcohol every time and remixing it until I get the entire product the same consistency. Because right now you can see that this is dry, but this is wet. I've never found that doing this damages the product, so don't be too concerned about doing this. It's better to save it as opposed to just having to throw it out. Okay, we've got a little bit more of a putty texture in here. I like mine a little bit more wet than that, so I'm gonna add a little bit more rubbing alcohol. So at this point I've gotten the product to the right consistency. It's kind of moving around, but it's very slow moving. It's not super liquidy and it's not super dry as well. So what I do at this point is I take the product and I drop it a few times. And this is just to disperse the product and make sure that it lies evenly, because I don't want chunks sitting up in one area and then a low area in another. Okay, after dropping this a few times, I've gotten it to an even level. I'm going to let this dry out for 30 minutes because I want some of that alcohol to evaporate before I actually press it. You can leave the product at this point, but it will be very powdery when you use it again. I prefer to actually press it with heavy books so that it stays more compact in the pan. So I'm gonna be back in 30 minutes and then we'll actually press this. Okay, about 45 minutes has passed and a lot of the alcohol has evaporated, so this is not nearly as liquidy as it was before, and it's ready for pressing. So I had initially thought that I was going to be pressing it with this Burt's Bees one, but it turns out it's just a fraction too big, so I found something a little bit smaller. It's just a Tarte glitter. It's a tiny bit smaller. It's gonna fit a little bit better in this compact. So I'm gonna take my tea towel here. I'm gonna place one layer of it over top of the product, and then I'm going to place this in the center of the compact and really push it down. And then I need something heavy on top of this. So I'm gonna take my dictionary and place it directly on top, and this is going to weight down the product and make it pressed. So I'm gonna leave this overnight and we'll come back tomorrow morning and see how it looks. Okay, it's now the next day. I ended up putting another book on top of it just to weight it down a little bit more, and it's roughly 12 hours later, so this should be completely dry. So let's take a look. And there we go. It's flattened out. It's got a little bit of a pattern on it, which comes from the tea towel. And let's swatch it. Yep. Comes off perfectly well. And now you've completely repaired your product and you can use it without having to worry about having little chunks everywhere. Hopefully this will help you if you've broken one of your powders. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!